So hello, and yeah, you guessed it. I have someone very, very special for you to meet today. And I want to tell you just a little teeny story. I've known Nancy, but not known Nancy for a very long time. Like, you know, how you have somebody that's kind of in your peripheral, or you're in the same orbits, but you don't really know each other. And last year in 2023, she came along on our Costa Rica adventure, and she had been kind enough to let me reach out to her and say, "Hey, if you're coming along on this adventure, would you do a little yoga with us in the jungle?" And she said yes. And we all benefited. Like, we had so much fun. And I was so grateful to get to connect with this amazing woman and really get to know her, because I didn't really know her before then. So today I want to introduce you to her, because not only are you going to love her, but you're also going to learn some very, very, very important tips to staying flexible, strong, resilient, and self-aware, and all the other good stuff for the rest of your life. So Nancy, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. Yes. So
We,
before we get started, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Tell us your backstory.
yeah. So I am a yoga therapist and I own a business here in Houston called Jai Yoga Houston. And I have been in the yoga field for over 25 years. And I came into yoga because I was a distance runner and I was injured. And I went to a doctor who told me that I had to stop running. And I said, no, I'll go find a doctor who's not going to tell me this. So I did go to a doctor who said, you can continue. However, you've got to make some changes in your life. And one of those was he recommended yoga. And I was so fortunate to find a really good teacher who was very well trained and very knowledgeable about the body and about alignment. And I started going once a week and practicing on my own. And within a couple of months, I was running pain-free.
Wow.
And so it really woke me up to the idea that there was more to staying fit than just, cardiovascular work and lifting weights, and that there were all kinds of benefits from a yoga practice. So I started teaching in 2000. I've been teaching ever since. And then I went back and got my yoga therapy certification several years ago and primarily work with individuals to help them address health issues and lifestyle issues.
Wow. Well, I you may or may not know this. I would assume I told you this, but I don't know. If anybody's been listening to the podcast for a while, they know this. My mother was a yoga instructor. And so I've had this like yoga thing around me my entire life. And I've also been like sneaking around trying not to do it. Like, honestly, if I'm going to be 100% honest, every so often I'll take a month or two and really like dive in, enjoy it. I enjoy it. And then it just slips away. So for you, it not only stuck, it became a passion. And now you're helping people. And when you do, tell us real quick, what is yoga therapy? I know it's different from yoga, but what is it?
Okay. So when we talk about yoga, what most people are familiar with are the classes that you might see at a rec center or a gym or a studio, which typically consist of the physical yoga practices, maybe some breathing, maybe a short meditation. There's usually workshops and things like that offered as well. But if you really delve into the history and the philosophy of yoga, there's a whole lot more behind that. And so when someone comes to me with an issue, perhaps they have an ongoing illness, a chronic illness that, they're trying to figure out maybe how to deal with the symptoms, how to deal with their lifestyle so that they can, live in their best possible life, knowing that they have maybe some restrictions that they have to deal with. So we can look at working with a specific acute situation. Maybe they have an injury or they're recovering from surgery or they're recovering from an illness. Or we can also look at, dealing with ongoing chronic illness or even degenerative illness, even aging. So a lot of that, when we're dealing with those kinds of things, also requires some mental and emotional aspects of work, and some of the yoga tools that we can use will address those as well. So we look at, as a yoga therapist, I look at the whole person. When they walk in, they have a whole form to fill out that tells me about their lifestyle. We talk about diet and sleep and rest and activity and just about every little detail I can delve into. And then we kind of try to sort that out and see if we can figure out a protocol that works for them. And it's really important to know that when you work with a yoga therapist, it's a partnership. Because if I give my clients homework for the next week and it's something they're really not interested in doing, it doesn't do either one of us any good.
Right.
So I put out some ideas of things that we might, work with, and then they get to choose what they want to do, what they want to try. And then we also talk about, what can you commit to this week? And some of my clients are willing to commit to one practice outside of our meeting, and others will commit to practicing every day. And it really depends on what they feel like they can do.
Oh, and I understand 100% because
Yeah.
that's right. You have to meet people where they're at.
Every
And
time. And I tell them, don't tell me, don't try to please me by telling me you're going to practice every day when that's not really feasible with your schedule. Let's try to figure out something that really will work for you so that when you come back next week, you feel like you succeeded,
right.
instead of having to come in and say, oh, well, I didn't really do that.
So, okay, it's not the same, but this kind of feels the same to me and just a little bit. So I've been to classes before. Like,
Hmm.
like you spoke about earlier, like you go to a class that, I don't know, it's a yoga studio or it's a rec or whatever. And I'm not the only one this happens to. You go in and you realize that you're not as good as other people, right? So, and I know, right? Like I know this, believe me, this is what I do for a living. And it still happens to me. So I'm in the class and I'm hiding in the back corner because I'm realizing that I can't do, I don't know, warrior pose with a tree on me or something like that. I don't really know my pose as well. So I know I'm not very good at this. So I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling noticed, even though I'm sure nobody even knows I'm there. How do people deal with this? And if you're working with them, you must be helping people get past this mind clutter that happens when people
Right. And I'll
go to
just
a
say
class.
about group classes, so much depends on the environment and the training of the teacher. Um, and some yoga classes really are intended to be athletic classes. And those classes do tend to attract people who are more competitive. And as a yoga teacher, I can't tell you how many times I've said yoga is not a competitive sport, but some of us just can't help ourselves when we
Right.
get in the room. But you can go to another studio or another class and talk to a different teacher, and you might find a different level of acceptance among the community in that class where it doesn't feel so competitive. And so one of the things I always tell people when they ask me about finding a yoga class is that yoga classes are like the breakfast aisle at the grocery store. You've got 500 rows or 500 boxes of breakfast cereal.
Right.
And sometimes you just have to pick one and try it to figure out that it's not your thing. So then
Yeah.
you can just go try another one. Or you start getting to know enough about what you need out of this practice that you can start asking the right questions and finding the right teacher.
Yeah.
So, some people want to just do athletic yoga and that's all they want to do. And that's perfectly fine. And those classes are available. Other people are looking for a more introspective practice, and those classes are out there too. What we find is that people are not educated, and in my situation doing what I do, doctors often aren't educated about what the differences in yoga are, the different styles of yoga, the different levels of teaching. um, and so when a doctor tells one of my clients go find a yoga class,
Mm.
They could end
right?
up
It's a
in one of those
crapshoot.
classes, yeah,
Yeah,
when what they really need is one that's more, geared towards healing and restoration.
yeah.
So for me, a big part of my job is educating people about what yoga is. I love assisting people in finding the right class if they don't necessarily want to do therapy, but they do want to find the appropriate class. I love doing that because when you get into the class that's right for you, things fall into place.
I could see that. I absolutely. I have had some classes in the past that I was just like, I'm home. And then
Yeah.
other ones that I'm like actually left in the middle because I'm like, I have to go. So I totally understand that. So can you talk to us just a little bit? I mean, a lot of us think about yoga as flexibility, right?
Mhm.
It's flexibility, but it's so much more. And I, and I'm going to have to just say this, having not done yoga with you, except for in the jungles of Costa Rica, my feeling is that you teach the whole piece. So tell us about what the whole piece is when somebody comes in thinking that they're going to learn to recover from injuries and be able to run again. Where does it take us from there?
Well, the interesting thing is yoga is, of course, 5,000 years old or more. And it's come down through many different areas of the world. There's a lot of influences from different countries and different lineages, different religions, even. But it's not a religion, it's basically a philosophy. And the studies tell us that yoga began as meditation. If you go back to the ancient texts, it started as meditation practice. And one of the theories is that the reason ancient yogis began doing asana was because they realized that they could not sit in meditation all day if their bodies weren't strong. And so they realized that they had to work their bodies as well. And that's where all the postures arose from. So there are different aspects of yoga that can be incorporated into a class if that's what you're interested in. And again, a super athletic class is not going to have these things, but we're looking at most people do think flexibility, but we're also looking at you build a lot of strength in yoga. And if you look around at the way most of us live our lives, um, sitting a lot, we don't use our upper bodies very much. And you can do a lot of upper body strengthening in yoga. So we've got the strength aspect, we've got the meditative aspect. Balance is key to so many things that we do, and it's something that a lot of people don't practice consciously very often. But we do a lot of balancing work, and that could be standing on one foot, that could be standing on your head, that could be, doing a handstand or planks or things like that. So there are all these different things that we can incorporate into those classes. And also, the biggest piece, the biggest difference between exercise and yoga is awareness. What's going on in our body when we're exercising. So when we're doing a posture, say warrior pose, being less focused on what our body looks like on the outside and more focused on what it feels like on the inside. Really starting to get deep enough awareness that you can feel which muscles are working. You can feel whether you're in a healthy alignment or not. And if you're not, you understand how to adjust so that you're in healthy alignment. It's more of an internal practice. And that's what I typically try to get over to my students in a group class.
Okay. And so when you say awareness, I have to believe that it goes beyond just how your body feels in the postures, doesn't it? Is it
Yes.
full
And
of life?
and typically almost every single client that I work with one-on-one, the first things that we work on are our own body awareness and breath awareness. Um, we talk about the five senses, right? And most people are familiar with the five senses. Now, research says there are many more senses that are, just not really acknowledged because they're not as easy to access. But two of those senses are interoception, which is that awareness of what's going on inside of our body. And another one is proprioception, which is what tells us where our body is in space. So that if I reach out my hand to you, I know that I've extended my arm, right? Um, we all have this, but a lot of us aren't really tuned into it. So that's a big part of what will work with someone when they first come in. Um, Another piece of that is if you're dealing with someone who's been in chronic pain, and most people I work with have in chronic pain. In order to survive with chronic pain, we start learning to ignore the pain. Sometimes we ignore it long enough that it just gets louder and louder and louder until we can't ignore it anymore. But oftentimes when people come to me, they really have shut off a lot of that awareness because they feel like they need to push through or they need to take care of things and they can't stop and they continue to go until suddenly they have a crisis in their body. So I try to get people to sort of like back into their body and to begin to notice these signs earlier so that we can remedy things before they get out of hand. And that
So
takes time and practice.
I would imagine. So, I mean, and I'm thinking, because I have had bouts in my time of chronic pain, without a doubt. And so basically, when you're working with somebody and they've kind of gotten to that point where they've anesthetized themselves, they
Mhm.
know they can't do the things they want to do because their bodies just aren't doing it anymore, but that pain becomes somewhat anesthetized or localized maybe. So your job is to help people grow, expand without being without slipping back into that pain.
Right. And I
Yeah,
really love what you just said about can't do, because I have people who come in all the time and say, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. They have a whole list of things they can't do.
right.
A lot of times, if we work with this awareness piece and this understanding of, my body is giving me signals that I need to address, and I need to address them in a timely manner. Um, it may not be that you can't do that thing. It may be more that you can't do that thing in the way you did before. So it's just like, when we get a little bit older, I'm a runner, right? Been a runner for a really long time. But I have decided at this age that I don't want to push my body as hard as I did before. I've had, you know, my knee injuries and I've had some other injuries. And I realized that I can go out and do what I used to do. Very, very likely to be injured, very likely to be not able to do anything else for a while I recover. So my decision at this point is I'm not going to do that in the same way. I'm going to not run as far. I might run more often, but I don't run as far. I want to stay in shape. I still want to run, but I don't want to be injured all the time. So now I have a decision to make. And this happens often with a lot of people. They come in with a list of things that they can't do. And then over time, we find out that they can do it. They just can't do it in the same way.
Yes, that is so perfect because I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, yeah, I see it with people all the time, is because if you can't go, or if you quote unquote can't go do a marathon, but you can go run a 10K on the trails that you find that you love even more. I mean, it's finding your flow wherever it is, isn't it?
It's finding your flow. And I think it's also finding your community. Finding other people who are interested in doing the same thing you are and are sort of in the same, I don't want to say necessarily age group because that's not it, but at the same level so that you can go out and you can enjoy that with other people without feeling like you're not good enough,
We're keeping up. You
like
can't
you're
keep
just
up.
trailing
Yeah,
behind,
right.
you know? So finding the group where you fit in and you're all sort of at the same level so that you can enjoy yourselves, just like we did in Costa Rica. We
Right.
managed to all do the things that, we felt comfortable doing together. And it was a lot of fun.
Right. Yes. Good point.
Yeah.
So one thing, and we haven't really touched on it, but you mentioned earlier when we were talking before we started about yoga tools. And I know that some of your yoga tools are like breath. I would assume they're nutrition. Talk about what you call yoga tools.
Well, um, I like to tell people we're going to build their yoga toolbox so that you
Uh-huh.
always, you have your little toolbox, and you can, when you do start developing these awarenesses, you can go into your little toolbox and figure out what you need. As a yoga therapist, I study yoga and Ayurveda. And in Ayurveda, you're looking at the whole person always. And so that's where lifestyle, diet, rest, activity, the idea is that, in order to be healthy, you have to have a healthy balance of all these things in your life. And that includes things like relationship and, social time. So it's not just about working out or just about being totally serious. You need to have some fun too. Um, so just to give you an example, so I have worked with someone with Parkinson's disease for almost 5 years now. And what I work on with him is totally different from anyone else that I'm working on with right now. And so for him, we do a lot of exercises for balance, because balance is crucial. It's something he really has to be aware of. We work a lot on balance. We work a lot on diet, because that he's greatly affected by what he eats and drinks. But the things that we choose for him to work on are probably different from someone else. So as far as tools, we might look at how you structure your day. How much rest do you get? Are you sleeping? Do you fall asleep easily? If you fall asleep easily, do you wake up in the middle of the night? The majority of my clients who come in wake up consistently between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And there's a reason for that. Um, we look at how you exercise, how much you exercise, what kind of exercise you do, and when you do it. We look at sometimes supplements. It kind of depends on what people are really, really interested. More on the yoga side, we've got the asana piece. We've got pranayama, which is breath work, meditation, yoga nidra. Um, and then we can also go into marma and a couple of other more esoteric practices if that's what people are interested in.
Okay. Okay. So, okay, you left us with an open loop there. And that open loop was a lot of people wake up between 2 and 3, and there's a reason for that. All right, close that loop for us. What's the
Okay.
reason?
Okay. So in Ayurveda, we talk about what we call doshas, and they're basically, qualities that we all have qualities of the three doshas, and I don't want to get into a lot of jargon, but Kapha, Pitta, and Vata. Kapha people are really earthy, solid. They can sit for a long time, and they tend to accumulate weight. Pitta people are your people with the fire in the belly, and they're more driven, type A type people. And then we have Vata people, and they're more airy, more esoteric. They're the types that are sort of like their minds kind of drift, and you know, they're not always really solid on the ground. So we have people who are super grounded, super driven, and then we have people that are, a little more airy fairy. And like I said, we all have all three of these qualities for the most part. Some people are what we call tridoshic. So they are like really balanced in these three areas. Most people are predominant in two areas and have one that's, not as predominant. We also break the day into segments of activity, types of activity. So there's a Kapha, Pitta, Vata part of the day and a Kapha, Pitta, Vata part of the night. So between around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning is a transition period when we move into a more mentally active period. So if we sleep through that, we're fine. If we wake up during that period, we're very likely for our mind to catch on to something that's going to keep us thinking and keep us awake. So
Ah,
one of the things we do is, come up with some tools maybe breathing techniques or some meditation techniques to sort of calm the mind back down so we can drift back into sleep.
okay. So people are waking up because there's that transition time, and then it's how you handle the transition that determines if you're going to be Betty by or stay awake thinking about everything that needs to get done or didn't get
That's
done.
right. And when you talk with a lot of people who consistently wake up that time in the morning, they do let their mind just sort of go.
Right.
Um, they don't know any different. And then they can't calm back down until usually just before the alarm goes off.
Right.
And they have to just get up, right?
At 15 minutes before, they're like, oh, I should have just woken up. Yes.
Yeah. Which, takes us to another thing that we have talked about before. We're talking about the toolbox, breath work, breathing practices. And we call that pranayama, which means breath work, kind of. There's little p prana, which means breath. There's what we call capital P prana, which is our life energy, and it's very, very much related. Um, Using pranayama or breath work um, is really interesting because there are different breathing techniques for different things. So if I have a client who's looking to relax, I'll give them a different breathing technique than I will give to someone who's trying to rev up their engine, so to speak. So those people that are waking in the middle of the night are going to want to do a practice that really does bring relaxation into the mind rather than a balancing practice or a stimulating practice.
Right. There's a
And that's
lot,
a
there's a
difference.
lot to this. I can see why you've been doing it for 24 years. And yeah,
There's a lot to learn, and I'm always whenever I do these things, like I said, I don't want to get caught up in jargon, and I don't want people to be confused and have too much information. But there's so much that people don't know about, and that's a big part of what I do is educate people, because most of these things are pretty easy to learn. They just require practice and understanding of the appropriate application, and they're not expensive, and you can do them yourself. You don't need someone to tell you what to do every time. And so it really is giving my clients something that they can have and hold on to when they need it.
right. It's that tool. So when we come back from this quick break, I want you to, if you don't mind, talk about 3 action steps that people can take going forward so that they can actually put to use everything that you've talked about.
Okay. That's my favorite part.
Okay, Nancy, tell us how to do this. Tell us how to make this work for us.
Okay. So 3 things that I would really want to stress to anyone listening today. Um, the first is that yoga really is a practice that's available to anyone. Um, I have clients right now in their 90s. I have 2 women in their 90s. I have one woman who's 86. And I have a couple of women I'm working with in their 70s. And just like we talked about earlier, their practice doesn't look like it might have when they were 50 or 30 or 20, but they do practice yoga. And so anyone can practice yoga. The second is that we talk about having a yoga practice, not having a yoga perfect. Is
Love it.
it's not, yeah, it's not about doing anything perfectly. It's about showing up with consistency, showing up with an open mind and an open heart, and just coming back over and over to the mat. And it's just like it's very similar to your message that we just need to revisit over and over and understand that we show up every day a little bit differently. So maybe some days we're tired, maybe other days we're jazzed, but in either case, we're going to show up and we're going to do our practice.
Nice.
Um, the third is and I'm really big on this. No matter how old you are, if you want to grow old and be vibrant and vital and be able to enjoy your later years, start today. Start now. Um, Start now. Figure out your practices, what you want to do. Know that you can change things as things in your life change, and just stay focused and aware and consistent. And that's the best we can do to stay vital as we get older.
Yeah, what a good point, because it is true that all we can do is start from where we are today. We can't
That's
change
right.
what's has or hasn't happened in the past. It's only going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times when I, meet with new people who basically feel like they messed up, they're kind of stuck in the past, like, why didn't I? And that doesn't benefit us in any way. So that's another thing we work on is, that mindset. I am who I am right now. And in this moment, I can make a decision to take care of myself or to not take care of myself. And we just make those decisions over and over and over again every day.
Well, thank you. And you know what? I have to say, this has been so much fun. And despite the fact that we spent an entire 10 days together in Costa Rica, a lot of this stuff I didn't even know about you. So thank you again. I really appreciate this.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. This is always fun to be with you. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing with everybody. I appreciate it so
Absolutely.
much.
All right.